Good to have you here, guys. Good to have you here. Let's have a look. One of the things that I would like to do, first and foremost, is that, of course, regardless of what you believe when it comes to ancient Egypt, but in general, whether you be a subscriber to the ancient astronaut theory, or whether you be a subscriber to all sorts of alternative theories, or whether you be someone who's like, no, I just need the facts, I want the archaeology, and I believe anything archaeology says, everyone is welcome here today. And one thing that is going to be a priority for me when it comes to discussing any topics of such as this one, is to make sure that you know that I'm here to try and present the most unbiased presentation that I can. Of course, I'm sharing my opinions on the topic, but I'm happy to listen to yours if you want to share what you think about these things. I know I'm a little condescending sometimes, so I'll try not to be. Okay, so I'm not here to shame anyone, so feel free to openly discuss and share your views as we read the title, Discussing the Pyramids and the Zahi Hawass podcast. This is clearly from Joe Rogan clips, so this is just a small clip where, as they were talking about Zahi Hawass, which is absolutely something that I do want to listen to, well, the guest that Joe Rogan had brought up, I think either the guest or Joe Rogan, actually right now don't remember, one of the two brought up these symbols, these hieroglyphs. I think it was the guest. And to be fair, I'll give you the historical background of these. I've looked into them, and I'll be honest with you. As you know, I am not convinced by the ancient astronaut theory. I'm not convinced by this idea that aliens have visited us and that they built civilization, that the aliens built the pyramids, that the aliens used advanced technology. I'm not convinced by it, but I am fascinated by it. So I absolutely understand why some people love this kind of stuff. But when you do look at this, and you look at these hieroglyphs specifically, we'll open and look at the cartouche. We'll try to find the best resolution possible. I have to be honest, it really does look like these are machines, like modern machines. They do. On one hand, I'm not happy when people pretend that they know more than they do and they make a profit off of it. Then that's a scam and it's a fraud. But I'm also not happy when archaeologists sometimes, I don't want to say archaeologists, are not trying to put everyone into one basket. One of my team members is an archaeologist, so it's not like I don't work with archaeologists. But sometimes some people in academia, they do make it sound like it's unbelievable to even look at these images and see something modern. And I've got to be honest, they do look like modern machines. Let's be honest about it. That doesn't mean that they were ancient machines, modern ancient machines, of course, but also the idea of, kind of trying to point the finger and laugh or try to be like, oh my gosh, I have to speak about this. Like that kind of attitude. I mean, let's be honest, the one at the bottom there looks absolutely like a spaceship. Do I believe it was a spaceship? No, but it looks like it. We gotta be honest about it. And I think that would really help if we at least were honest in understanding where the people that do subscribe to the possibility, which I cannot falsify, by the way, to the possibility that we were, in fact, visited in the past. Who knows? Maybe. Like, that's all I can say about it. And then they see this and they can start to having their imagination fly. But today we're going to look at the context, because perhaps you are familiar with this. Like, if you don't, then today might be an interesting episode. And as always, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm here to tell you this is the information I've gathered on this as I was preparing. But you use your mind, use your critical thinking, and come to your own conclusion. Fascinating topic, however. I love this stuff. I absolutely love this stuff. Now, the real question is, are these helicopters in Zahi's book? That's the real question. I'm talking about that. So let's have a look at the... Let me see if I can find a good picture of the hieroglyphs in questions. So, yeah, absolutely. My gosh, that's a lot of stuff. All right, so let's have a look at what we are working with. So the idea is there are these hieroglyphs, and as you can see, if I can click one of these and we can enlarge it a little bit, I'm gonna move myself. You will notice that, to be fair, this one here does look like a helicopter. So, if anyone tells me, oh no, it doesn't look like... I'm happy to consider pareidolia, by the way. And if you don't know what pareidolia is, I'll tell you in a second. But for those who do know, yeah, of course I'm happy to consider pareidolia as probably the explanation. But it does look like a helicopter, so don't even try to give me the... no, I don't know, Metatron. To me, that looks like... No, it looks like a helicopter. It does. Again, the reasons I explained, we'll talk about it, but it does. This one here looks Some people said it looks like a submarine. To me, it looks like a flying tank. You know, when you have sometimes, I don't know if you ever played Command and Conquer Tiberian Wars, and then you play as the aliens, they've got these flying tanks that kind of look like this. So they are like hovering over the ground, and then they move very fast. They're kind of gray. That's what it does look like that to me, rather than a submarine. But then this one, we'll have to decide which one is the craziest looking, by the way. I'm probably going to pull it. But anyway, number 1 is helicopter. Number 2 is flying tank. Number 3 looks like a freaking spaceship / UFO, UAP, whatever nomenclature you want to use. Of course, seen from the side. So this is kind of a profile picture, if you will. And yeah, there we go. So some people have also talked about the image at the bottom here. I personally don't see anything. I've heard people refer to this as an airplane, but to be honest, I've never seen an airplane look like anything like this. To me, this looks like nothing. I guess maybe, let's see if you can use your imagination a little bit. Do you think this could be some kind of pod or like a base of operation, and these are like UFOs? This one is about to land, and here is like a little section where you've got the little aliens in here, like command control tower, if you will. And maybe this one is like a hangar, and this is a defense system. I mean, then again, now that I'm spending more time with it, I've got to say maybe, yes, exactly. Yeah, maybe this could be turned into something as well. Yeah, so anyways, Thunderbird, there you go. So these are the 3 that we are discussing in this situation. Anyone who would see this, well, of course, a lot of this stuff has been found in the 1800s, early 1800s, in fact. So for them, this would have looked like nothing. So you do have to take into consideration the mind of the reader. The mind of the reader and the brain that creates the interpretation is, of course, part of this, because it's not like in the 1800s, they would, 1815, 1818, they could really see much as we do. All right, so let me explain what pareidolia is before we continue with this, and then we see what archaeologists say about this. So pareidolia is the perception. Let me move myself to the right again, though, because I feel a little lost. There you go. The perception of apparently significant patterns or recognizable images, especially faces, but not limited to, in random or accidental arrangements of shapes and lines. Now, given the second definition here, the second sector of this definition, wouldn't really apply, because these are intentional. These are hieroglyphs. With that being said, it could be applied, because one of main academia's current interpretation of this explanation is that what you're actually seeing are not complete hieroglyphs, but they are overlapping hieroglyphs, in the sense that this was originally something written. I'll tell you what it says, by the way. This is something that was written at one point by Seti I, artisans, of course, he was paying for. But then he dies, and his son, Ramses, decided to write his own hieroglyphs on top of this, and there is a reason for it. We'll see why these specifically, not maybe other, although this is something that does happen in ancient Egypt. And as he was writing these, you have to imagine that when hieroglyphs are, imagine that they are creating, they decided that there is a section of the structure, and I'll tell you what the structure is, where they are like, we're going to write some hieroglyphs here. They need to prepare the rock. We will read this a little bit today. And they need to plaster it. So they plaster it, they prepare it, and then they start carving these. If you've ever seen how, for example, even ancient Egyptian art is created, and as I say, we'll go a little bit into the details through this study. But in general, you have several artists. An artist will first start by writing in red the main silhouettes of what they're going to either draw or write. They do this in red. That's the first priming. And then a different artist will go over these initial markings in black, usually. And then they would start the actual carving when it comes to these. Or if it's art, like we will see in this case, then they start applying the pigments. So that's how you do it. It's kind of a multi-process, and there are several people involved. What academia is saying, we'll go into the details, but what academia is saying is that these are overlapping hieroglyphs. They can recognize the hieroglyphs that at the initial sections, and then the second ones that have been applied. But unfortunately, due to the poor preservation of this location, and you can kind of see this, started losing parts of the second layer of the plaster that was applied to cover up the initial hieroglyphs. And therefore, since those get exposed again, then you have this, basically these three. That's how they explain it. For our definition, it is not random or accidental in the sense that the hieroglyphs have been purposely written, but the accidental or random aspect of it would be the fact that the losing, the deterioration of the site is what created this coincidence as the archaeologists define them. Okay, so continuing on the situation with pareidolia, let's see what Merriam-Webster, just to have a complete definition. The tendency to perceive a specific, often meaningful image, I like how this is meaningful image, in a random or ambiguous visual pattern. Okay? The reason pareidolia happens, by the way, whether you believe that this is a case of pareidolia, whether you believe whatever else you want to believe, the reason why it happens is because we are hardwired to recognize faces first, and in general, recognizable patterns second. It's in fact an advantageous trait for our survival, because you have to look at it this way. If you are a prehistoric man in the Stone Age, and you're going around hunting, hunter-gatherers tribe, and then you think you see something in the bushes. Maybe it's kind of dusk, not perfectly illuminated, lots of possible predators and danger all around, and you think you see something. It is objectively better for any organism to be able to see a face where there isn't. Big deal. You thought there was something, it was just a combination of shadows and leaves moving in a certain way as they're blown by the wind, with the branches that made it look like it had arms. Okay, I thought there was something, I got a little startled, I leave the area a little early, not a big deal. Or maybe we go and check, we throw a spear, not a problem. Who cares? But now imagine the opposite scenario, where the same hunter, prehistoric hunter, thinks he sees something in the bushes, but then he's like, no, that's nothing, because he doesn't see it. He does not see, because the face of the actual predator or the enemy from the other tribe or whatever you want, the bear, he doesn't recognize it because he doesn't have his brain that can do that. The problem with that is that then your guard is going to be low, you're going to continue your little foraging, and then you're going to die. So it just makes sense that we tend to see images and patterns that are recognizable to us, particularly faces, and also because, again, we can recognize threats that way. That's why pareidolia is a thing. Now, it's not always that it is a case of pareidolia. Sometimes, yeah, there are images that we recognize and they're real. Famous case of pareidolia was what happened with the face of Mars, which I think was a situation that occurred due to lack of proper resolution. That's what it looked like, and objectively, it does look like a human face, if anything, which makes it even more fascinating. But then, if you see better resolution pictures, it kind of disappears. Cool. All right, so where are these found? There are two locations, and we often talk about them on this channel, and they have to do with Seti. Now, who is Seti? Seti, as I can kind of put it here on screen just to make it a little easier so we can get a little visual representation, but in general, Seti I is a pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, so we're in the New Kingdom, second pharaoh if I'm not wrong, Seti I. We can get a nice image. Seti I, important pharaoh, father of Ramses II, and he built both the tomb of Seti I, which is this one here, and I've addressed the contents of the tomb of Seti I multiple times when I was making my response videos to the Afrocentric community. If you remember, the tomb of Seti I was one of the main areas of disagreement, and I personally think I came out on top of that categorically. We'll revisit a few things. So tomb of Seti I is one place and one structure that we often discuss, and it's very important for all the art that we see on the walls. And then the other one is the temple of Seti I. The temple is the one that contains these ones here, just to make a clear distinction, and it's found in the city of Abydos, which is a very important city when it comes to archaeology in the context of Egyptology, because of the multiple necropolis. There is the temple, of course, and several other structures that are important for the study of ancient Egyptian culture and mythology and whatnot. This paper that I just showed you a second ago, this one here, is instead about the tomb, which is called KV17, and then we'll show some of the stuff that has to do with that. But when we talk about the helicopter, we're talking about the temple. Okay. Now, if you look at this, it's a good representation of what we're talking about now. And Seti I wrote something in this area. What he wrote is his king's titles, because in ancient Egypt, usually pharaoh can have up to 5 royal titles to their name. And so they would write all of these, often in these temples, that, because do remember the Seti I is one of those, it's kind of a restoration pharaoh. It was a pharaoh that was reconnecting to the previous cults. It was a pharaoh that was bringing back the power of Egyptian authority in vogue. So it's kind of a restoring the tradition type of pharaoh. Anyways, he wrote his kingly names on here. But then the temple wasn't finished when he was alive. He died before the temple was completed. And his son, Ramesses II, is the one that completed the temple. And after he completed the temple for his father, he decided to put his own kingly titles, royal titles, and he wrote them on top of those of his father. Not very nice, if you ask me, but that's the idea. So when we look at these hieroglyphs, at least that's the explanation when it comes to mainstream archaeology, we have to look at them as different hieroglyphs. So in dark, as you can see, so the part that kind of looks like the helicopter's blades is part of the first hieroglyph. Am I covering it? No. Okay, good. Yeah, no, I'm not covering it good. So the dark green, dark bluish green is the part that was part of the initial drawing done by Seti I. And then you can see, so here it would be just, it kind of stops looking like a helicopter when you remove the bright green, which is what Ramses instead wrote. And these have been identified as you read them separately, as separate glyphs. When it comes to the tank, kind of still looks like a tank. So that doesn't really work with the tank. I guess what you lose is part of the spine at the back. You know, man, this has a word. A lot of cars have it. They had to add these to the Audi TT model from 1999 because they were dangerous without it. And they added them to balance. What are they? A spoiler, yes. So this kind of loses, thank you, appreciate. It kind of loses the spoiler. It makes it less aerodynamic. So I think it looked cooler with this. So if you remove it, it loses a bit of that, but it still kind of looks a bit like a tank, not as much. The one that I think is losing a lot of it is, of course, the spaceship. But then again, it kind of stops being a spaceship. It still looks a bit like a flying saucer. Maybe it's just a flying saucer at this point, but it is a recognized glyph. So, but then again, I think the one that loses the most is the helicopter. Do you guys agree? The helicopter is kind of gone once you remove the bright green. The tank is still kind of there, but loses the little thing here, the spoiler. And the UFO, the spaceship from the side, kind of reverts back to a more typical UFO at this point, or UAP, although we do lose part of the lower end. You can kind of see where this is going with the situation. Likewise, what we were kind of imagining as, the exercise that I was doing a second ago. Maybe now the tank is the UFO, possibly. But the exercise we were doing here, and this could have been the basis of operation, and this is the tower, this is a flying thing that is arriving, and this is the hangar, and there's a more vehicles, or maybe a astro defense thing, a golden dome. Yeah, all of this is gone. Like, this one is completely gone. Once you see that they are separate, all my imagination here, unfortunately, because it was really cool, but this one is completely 100% gone. At this point, there's nothing. Yeah, the reason why I said Audi is because that was my car. I had a Audi TT from 1999. It's exactly the car I had in Italy. It was my car. Sold it when I moved to the US. Cool. All right. Now, don't tell me to look into it online. Maybe wait for me to conclude the presentation, Matt Dubinsky. Now you're telling me, please look it up online. It's debunked, all in caps. I get it. I think you're getting a bit emotional about this. I'm the guy who sits down, looks at this, calm as a monk in morphine, and then review the data bit by bit. That's what I'm doing. So no need to get, if you get mad, means you're getting compromised, and that's problematic, my friend. Egyptian Halo, since Daniel Edwards. Yeah, I think it would be more, yeah, exactly. If you look at these that way, it's more Halo than Call of Duty, I want to say, at that point. Absolutely. Yeah, spoiler, I could not think of that word. I don't know why, but it happens. Yeah, they are uncanny. I like that you use that word. They are uncanny, and I can absolutely understand, which is why I am not on the side of let's shame anyone who even dares to think. I don't appreciate that approach. The images are compelling. The only problem I have is when people try to make a profit or go viral stating facts that they don't have. That's that's when I draw the line. But the images are compelling when they are not examined with this. The images are compelling. And the Egyptian light bulb, I'm aware of that. Yeah, sure. I wish it was real. Me too, Big Boss, by the way. 100%. I wish it was real. Looks more like a battleship to you. You mean a battleship like in the sea? So you see it as, yeah, like Royal Navy, literally Royal Navy, but like pharaonic Royal Navy, man. Pharaonic Royal Navy. We need some guns though. Yeah, we discussed pareidolia earlier on, absolutely. I do think the pareidolia is the most reasonable explanation because, of course, we have to try. As much as I love the idea, it's, let me see if I get the actual nomenclature, because I do, yeah, 5 official royal names in their titles. That's what's basically written there. And it's just that the son, Ramses II, kind of wrote on top of what Seti I said.